Chapter 20, the Muslim Empires. We will be looking at the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals in India. Again, make sure you're looking at your maps, have an understanding of where these empires were, where they've developed. Once again, those that are taking their map serious on their power notes, it's really going to aid you in understanding how the growth of these empires and who was in control of this land before they were and what land they're conquering and how big their empires are compared to other ones. So again, make sure you do look at these maps. They are really important, even though I kind of breezed through them a little bit. All right, the Ottomans, from the frontier warriors to empire builders. The beginning of this chapter was kind of a review for us. We've seen a lot of this information in other chapters, even all the way back to chapter 9 with the Byzantine Empire. So we've seen a lot of repetition here. Mid-1200s, Mongols defeat the Seljuk Turks. We saw this in chapter 14 and 15. The Ottomans emerged dominant and push out the Mongols. We saw that in chapter 14. Into the Balkans, 14th and 15th century. We saw this in chapter 18 with Russia. Well, they'll have the Crimean War and they'll be battling in that area. 1453, take Constantinople. We've seen this, this is the 4th chapter. This information's been in there. Expansion into the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe, and they will dominate the Mediterranean, which we've actually gone all the way and seen where they lose parts of the Mediterranean. Okay, a state geared to warfare, military dominant, and this is the beginning of your gunpowder empire. Some historians mark this period by calling it the Age of Gunpowder or the Gunpowder Empires. So once again, make sure you read the in-depth on the gunpowder age. It's really important. Turkic horsemen become warrior nobility. Janissary infantry become powerful. Conscripted youth from conquered peoples. The Janissary are really important here. They're going to gain some power because they're going to hold the armaments. And so they're able to use that to gain power in the military and gain some political power. And therefore they're going to be with the viziers rivaling for power. And eventually, as you have weak sultans, they're really the ones who are leading the empire. Conscripted youth. These are the captures from fighting against the Byzantines, fighting up in the Balkans, in Africa. And they'll take the youth and they'll bring them into the courts. They'll educate them. A lot of them will become janissaries. A lot of them will become bureaucrats and administrators to the sultan or shahs. And even to the point where a lot of them will be converted to Islam to help out. Again, make sure you're looking at the maps. All right, the sultans and their court use factions against each other. The viziers oversees large bureaucracy, held more power than the sultan, and no succession. All right, we've seen this. This is a common theme throughout the Muslim empires, dating all the way back to the post-classical age. Now we're seeing it again in the early modern age, where you're not having a clear line of succession. You'll have a good ruler. Also, you'll have some good rulers who get paranoid about somebody trying to assassinate them. They have their bodyguards and private armies. There's no real line of succession. Family members are killed off. And you don't have anybody raised to be an able leader. You get bad rulers in and you're going to have decline. So a very similar theme that we saw in the post-classical, the Umayyad, the Abbasids, we're going to see again in these Muslim empires as well. Constantinople was in ruins early on. During the decline of the Byzantine, less and less of the infrastructure of that city had been kept up. And then, of course, with the battles against the Turks and Arabs and then the Ottomans, they are eventually parts of the city are reduced to rubble. And when Suleiman comes to power, he is going to rebuild Constantinople, and it's going to be called Istanbul. And so that's where you get Suleiman's mosque in the 16th century. It was built over the Church of Sophia. He will also revive it as a commercial center. We had studied before Constantinople, huge trading city. It will once again become that. Artisan guilds will emerge as well. Very good comparison to the artisan guilds in the Middle Ages in Western Europe. Major difference here, though, is there's going to be more government involvement that you're going to have with the Ottomans. And then Turkish language prevails over Persian and Arabic in the court life starting in the 17th century. this is important to know. This is one of those questions on the quiz. It's kind of the halfway point. The Ottoman Empire is going to last all the way into World War I, the 20th century, so we're getting closer to modern dates. They start off with a Persian with the Turkish language, but Persian will end up prevailing. All right, problem of Ottoman decline, strong until the late 1600s, late 17th century. They'll begin with their decline. Again, I just mentioned you're having weak rulers, not as much as put into the infrastructure. They're not extending their boundaries anymore and putting effort into building their empire. Also, the Janissary are going to gain a lot of power, and they're going to become conservative in their military aspects because they don't want to lose their power. They become very powerful, and they see in order to make the advances needed to keep up with Western Europe and other areas, they don't necessarily want to do that because they don't want to lose their power. Converting over to some of the other new tactics would mean a loss in power, and they don't want to do that. Again, we've already talked about the defeat in the Mediterranean by the Spanish. They will rebuild their fleet, and with the Italian merchants, they will still have a big control in the Mediterranean. But the key is Portugal, Spain, and of course we read about exploration already, that they're going to sail around to Africa. So they are bypassing the Middle East now. All right, with the outcome of not trading as much with the Middle East and the bullion from the New World, we have a major inflation, and so it's hurting their economy as well. So between a lack of a strong government and lack of putting things back into the infrastructure and heavy taxes on people, you're also going to see inflation really hurt the economy as well. Okay, the Ottomans were Sunni, and now we're going to move on to the Safavids, who were Shiite. And so already you can see we've already studied the split between the Sunni and Shiite earlier on in the post-classical age, and now we're going to see an effect of this where obviously even though we have two Muslim empires, they're going to clash against each other. And so the Safavid family were from Sufi preachers and mystics. Salah al-Din leads the revival, and in 1501 Ishmael is going to take the throne and call himself a Shah, and will be in charge. Now, the Safavids early on will suffer a defeat at Chaldiran in 1514, and basically what ends up happening is they're going to lose part of their western area that borders the Ottoman Empire. Now, when all said and done, the borders basically end up back at what they used to be. The Safavids will move the empire inward. The capital will be at Isfahan. Winter will come about. The Ottomans are needing to resupply. The capital's too far away for them to continue to challenge, and so they're having to fall back. When that happens, the Safavids take their land back after a time period, and basically by the end of this, they now have the borders back to what they were. All right, politics and war under the Safavid Shahs. Tahmasp I becomes the Shah, and he brings about restoration. And Abis I is also known as Abis the Great, is going to lead the height of the Safavid Empire. This is also where we're going to have an influence of Persian bureaucrats. All three of the empires we'll be looking at have a Turkish background, but the Safavids, if you look on the map, they're in that middle region where the Persian Empire used to be, so there's a lot of Persian influence in this area. And so what ends up happening is they are going to adopt Persia as their court language and court use. Over the Turkic language that they started off with. So it's kind of it's the opposite. So if you just memorize Ottoman or Safavid and remember the other is the opposite, you'll be totally fine with that. Shiism is modified and it spreads to the entire empire just because they're trying to make sure that they're defending themselves against the Sunni Ottomans. The elite influence and artistic splendor. This will be for the Ottomans and for the Safavids, both patrons of the arts, and so were the Mughals as well. All three Muslim dynasties will be patrons of the arts. Here are Persian tiles for you in the Safavid area, and some historians and some art historians believe that Safavids might even have more of an artistic ability in their mosques and palaces than did the Ottomans. All right, society and gender roles, Ottoman and Safavid comparisons. Very similar, both have warrior aristocrats. Same thing with the Mughals, very warlike. All three of these empires with warriors on top in their social orders. They move to rural estates after a conquest, so they'll be ruling areas. Not quite like feudalism, but they are given control over areas, villages, and peasants, which ends up, when there's a decline, ends up hurting your nation. Threat to central power, imperial workshops, artisans were patronized, as I mentioned earlier. International trade was encouraged. The only difference is that the Safavids aren't as market-oriented as the Ottomans are. And women will lose freedom, subordinate to fathers and husbands. It is patriarchal. But as, of course, we read and as we've seen, women did try to push the boundaries, especially in the Safavid. They were wearing a lot more colorful robes, headdresses, veils, even to the point of some women not wearing their veils out in public. So they were pushing the boundaries. It wasn't like women in the culture were all accepting of this. Those that were more strict were the upper elites. All right, the rapid demise of the Safavid Empire. Abis the Great becomes paranoid, and he removes all his heirs, and a weak grandson inherits and begins the decline of the Safavids. Eventually, outside threats, internal conflicts are going to lead to some problems. In 1772, Isfahan, their capital, is taken by Afghanis, and Nadir Khan Asfur becomes the Shah, and he wasn't able to stop anything that was happening earlier. Even though he was a great ruler, he still couldn't stop the Afghanis from coming in. He was a great military ruler, attacked the Ottomans, attacked the Mughals, but once again the decline had already started and he wasn't able to gain much ground. Okay, the Mughals, in the apex of Muslim civilization in India. Babur is going to pretty much get his father's tribe, who's going to be killed, so at an early age he takes it on. He's driven from Afghanistan by the Uzbeks. He's not able to gain control there. So he turns, after a while, turns his attention to India. He sees the opportunity to be able to take that in 1526. Turkic and Mongol Khan descendants, so he traces his line again back to Turks and Mongols here. Panipat in 1526 defeats the Muslim Lodi dynasty, which we saw in the video. Kunua in 1527 defeats the Hindu Confederation. In 1530, however, you're going to have Babur, who has his death at 48, and he will be succeeded by his son. His son was very young at that age, and so he has to flee to Persia. And Mughal rule will eventually be restored in 1556 when he gains some credibility after a while, I think it's about 10 to 15 years, and he asserts himself, brings in some force, and he's able to re-establish the Mughal Empire. Akbar and the basis for a lasting empire. Humayun's 13-year-old son was Akbar. Once again, we have a young person coming in to rule here, and it looked like he was going to end up having to retreat himself. However, he proved to have some very wise advisors around him that didn't take advantage of him, and he was a military genius, not great administrator, but military-wise, and he is able to reconcile with the Hindus. He starts a new religion to help Muslims and Hindus. It really doesn't take off, but just showing the reforms that he's willing to have to bring unity to India, he's compared to being one of the great rulers in world history. And he'll have a toleration. He gets rid of the head tax that had been so straining on a lot of Hindus during that time period. All right, social reform and social change. Women, position improved in the court and administration, but decline elsewhere. Widows encouraged to remain with their sati prohibited, but this was not widespread. Once again, trying to have reforms, at least saying it, whether it was actually carried out or not. He was against child marriage. However, child marriage did start at the age of 9, and it looked like not much was started with that. The Sahi, again, prohibited but still practiced. So even though they were trying to stop it, it was still occurring. So, but these reforms were working in uniting India. Seclusion undermined by women's market days, however strictly enforced by the upper class. India, the women would probably have more of the rights, especially the Muslim women were influenced by the Indian women and their colors and the way that they dressed. And so the market days, referring to women going without their veils and headdresses down to the markets. The Mughal splendor in early European contacts, death of Akbar. His reforms don't survive. The empire stays strong in name only. Cotton textiles were going to Europe. There was also a tax put on that. We saw that in chapter 16 and 17. And we'll see a little bit more of that in the next couple chapters with some struggles in that area. Artistic achievement, the Mughal area under Jagar and Shah Jahan in the 17th century. This is where you'll get the Taj Mahal and some splendid mosques and palaces and cities as well. Women involved in the political life in India. Ordinary woman, Nur Jahan, the wife of Jahangir, who became just more self-indulged with himself until his wife dies, and then he builds the Taj Mahal, devotes his life to doing that. Was really the head of the power. Of course, she died having birth. She continued to have her children, so trying to be the mom and yet trying to be a ruler at the same time. Mumtaz Mahal was the wife of Shah Jahan. Now, he was a capable ruler, but she had a lot of influence upon him and in the courts. Ordinary women, position does decline somewhat. The Sati spreads among upper classes despite being outlawed, and more of Akbar's reforms are eventually died out and not carried on anymore. The beginnings of the imperial decline, Aurangzeb succeeds the Shah Jahan, and he starts two programs that lead to the decline. First one, rule all of India. The second, cleanse Islam of Hindu taint, which obviously isn't going to go so well when we saw earlier with Akbar and his reforms helping aid and unify India. This is going to help divide India. 1707 controls most of India. It was expensive and distracting. The military, they were putting all their energy into it, and therefore they were not able to focus on internal problems and infrastructure. And also, because of this military, it was also allowing a lot of these local military leaders to gain more power than the rulers were able to handle. Other developments disregarded. You had revolts in peasant villages, autonomy of local leaders, I just mentioned that. Hindus excluded from high office, again, cleansing Islam of Hindu. Non-Muslims tax. So what Akbar had done with removing the tax, Aurangzeb brings back, and it ends up hurting the people. Marathas and Sikhs challenge rule. So again, you're having a lot of internal conflict here as well. And India open to foreign rule and exploitation. You're going to have Afghanis coming in from the north, and then you're going to have Western Europeans coming in through the Indian Ocean. And that will end chapter 20.